the attention it otherwise deserves because of everything going on in presidential politics and at the border. But last week, a U.S. Navy petty officer pled guilty to conspiracy and bribery for providing highly sensitive military information to the Chinese government. Yeah, that's still a no-no. He received about 15 grand in 14 separate payments from a agent of the Chinese Communists in exchange for details on America's military security, training exercises, and military infrastructure. I guess the spy balloon wasn't enough. The documents included photos and videos detailing the operation of Navy ships and an overseas military installation. And apparently the asset of the Chinese Communists was trying to get him to amp up his espionage before, I guess, he was discovered. He's only getting 2 years. 2 years was his sentence.
What?
Yeah. 2 years or so. A military officer who commits an act of espionage on behalf of the Chinese Communist government gets 2 years, and grandma, who was welcomed into the U.S. Capitol by Capitol Police but did trespass, gets pretrial detention and 3 years. And you wonder why people are losing faith in our criminal justice system. For more on this topic, we're pleased to be joined by Joseph Moreno, former federal prosecutor with DOJ in the National Security Division, former staff member with the FBI's 9/11 Review Commission, and a U.S. Army combat vet. Joseph Moreno, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Dan, good morning. Great to be with you.
So, you wrote about this case of the Chinese Communist spy, as a former federal prosecutor and as well as a combat veteran. What is your, I understand from your piece that you thought this was remarkably lenient, but what's your explanation for why it was?
Well, Dan, I think you're correct that this case is not getting the attention it deserves. And just to take a step back for a minute, every presidential administration has the right to set its law enforcement priorities. So in the past, maybe it's been white-collar crime or organized crime or violent crimes in the inner cities. But in the last 20 years, particularly since 9/11, national security law enforcement has been a top priority of just about every administration since then, to the point where they even broke off an entire division within the Justice Department, the National Security Division. They staffed it with over 100 federal prosecutors whose sole purpose is to focus on counterterrorism and counter-espionage cases. So fast forward 20 years now, we're under the Biden administration, and like you pointed out, you have a active duty Navy sailor who is selling real-time information about military bases overseas, military exercises, so basically the time and place where sailors will be operating in the Pacific, photos, video recordings, basically real-time information. And this wasn't a one-time sale. This is 14 different transactions between this petty officer and a Chinese official. And what does he get, to your point? 27 months and a $5,000 fine. The fine doesn't even equal the $15,000 he received in exchange for the information he sold to the Chinese.
Well, the government just wants its, 1/3 cut, just wants to wet its beak, I guess, like normal.
Exactly, right?
Yeah. But just on that though, so here's the thing I suspect his attorneys argued, but you tell me, this was not information that compromised national security. This was low-level information. This is information Chinese communists probably had anyway, and so on and so forth. He's only getting paid $1,000 here and $1,000 there. This isn't high-level Richard Hansen type stuff. But obviously, we also know from the case file that this was, sort of a grooming by the Chinese communist operative to get him, producing information, and then let's level up to get more and more sensitive information. So I don't conceive how DOJ, was satisfied with this sentence. Like it doesn't seem to me there's like any mitigating circumstances. Is my point.
Well, I guess the one point that the defense has made is the information wasn't officially classified, so that's why he wasn't charged under the Espionage Act. He kind of wriggled through and said, well, there's no classification stamp on the idea that an exercise will be held at this time and place. There's no classification regarding the details of a Navy base in the Pacific Ocean. So that's how they kind of wrangled out of it.
But we know where this was going. We know where this was going, to my point.
Absolutely. I mean, what bothers me is this isn't just some old classified file that someone pulled out of storage, dusted off, and sold to the Chinese. This is real-time information. This is putting our military service members' lives at risk right now. And like you say, this was building to something else. So it starts here. It starts with photographs. It starts with low-level information. But we all know where it goes. And so I think that's the danger here. And what is this signaling? I mean, 27 months compared to, like your point, 9/11 rioters who are getting years and years in prison?
J6, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I don't even see how it compares, frankly.
Well, what does this do for the reputation of the Department of Justice, if they even have a reputation anymore?
Well, Amy, I think that it just shows where their priorities are. And they hired over 100 federal prosecutors just to prosecute the J6 instance. And yet here you have an actual national security danger, and clearly it's not getting the attention it deserves. And a couple of warning signs jump out here at me. Either the case was mishandled, and this was the best the government could get because something was done wrong. I don't know why it was charged by federal prosecutors rather than military prosecutors. That's also a red flag. That's, again, something's not quite right here. And apparently the government only asked for 36 months. So it wasn't even like this was the judge that kind of got out of control and gave a low sentence. This was actually in the ballpark of what the government asked for. So they didn't even really shoot very high for this whole case.
Another matter, too, I mean, since you have some breadth on the topic, Paul Sperry for Real Clear Investigations is reporting that we have another potential sweetheart deal the Department of Justice has arranged with respect to a tax scofflaw. Not quite the same fact set as with Hunter Biden, but still, former IRS contractor Charles Littlejohn, he's the one who stole and helped publicize the confidential tax records of Donald Trump and 7,500 other wealthy Americans. Ken Griffin, who actually sued the IRS over this, and good for him for doing so. He is looking at little, maybe no jail time when he's sentenced later this month because the DOJ allowed him to plead to a single felony count. Obviously, he did this 7,500 times. And the original plea deal in the pre-sentencing report was a range of 4 to 10 months in prison. And they argue in part because he leaked the reams of stolen private income tax data to reputable news organizations like the New York Times and ProPublica. First of all, they're not reputable. But secondly, even if they were reputable news organizations, well, what the hell does that matter? I mean, the ends justify the means. Since you were trying to publicize Donald Trump's tax returns to a reputable news organization, that's a mitigating circumstance. I mean, so again, now we have the combination of the IRS, like we've been dealing with for the last decade since Joe Obama terms 1 and 2, with the 501c3 scandal under Lois Lerner and company, and now now to Hunter Biden, and now to this. So it's the combination of DOJ and IRS colluding to cover each other's asses.
Yeah, Dan, you're spot on. I mean, there's no carve out for providing things to newspapers and saying, well, it's okay. I mean, I can think of very few things more corrupt than an insider in the government who we trust with information, whether it's classified military information, whether it's tax information, for them to abuse that trust and release that information, whether it's for personal gain, whether it's for political gain because they think they are airing something to the public that should be known. The fact is, it is so wrong. And again, this is such a poor example of allowing someone to get off with a slap on the wrist, where this should be taken so much more seriously, because this signals to me now that other people will be willing to do this because they'll see there's not much consequence to it.
You know, it reminds me of the old Yakov Smirnoff joke. In America, you protest government. In Soviet Russia, government protests you. And that's what we have here. We have government protesting us in Soviet America.
Yeah, Dan, sadly, I am old enough to remember those jokes. So, yes, I fully get it.
Joseph Moreno. Yeah, I always try and work in Yakov Smirnoff where I can. Joseph Moreno, former federal prosecutor, DOJ in the National Security Division, former staff member with the FBI's 9/11 Review Commission, and a U.S. Army combat veteran. Joseph Moreno, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan. Good to be with you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our Turnkey.pro answer line.
Hear about the big stories of the day, then talk about them right here on Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Signature Bank is Chicago's fastest growing independently owned business bank. It's a bank where relationships still matter. Signature Bank knows your name and your story. I'm Dan Proft, and I know this because Signature Bank is my business bank.